Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to The Roundup. We're a Cowboy State Daily podcast, and we focus on interesting people in the Cowboy State. Today is going to be so much fun. We're going to have a grand time talking to one of Cowboy State Daily's own reporters who's got a fantastic history of his own. I'm so thrilled to be able to dive into this background. But First, I want to make sure that you all know about another fantastic podcast out there. It's called the Wyoming Business Alliance's Business from the Basement podcast. If you are a business person in Wyoming, if you are a manager, if you're an owner, if you are interested in being a business person in Wyoming, the Wyoming Business Alliance Business from the Basement podcast has resources. It has really fantastic stuff for you to just get yourself prepared and in that brain space for being a successful Wyoming business person. Business from the Basement podcast, check it out, but check it out after you stay tuned to this podcast, because today it's going to be a great time. Mark Heinz is my guest today on the Roundup. If you watch Cowboy State Daily Video News, you know who Mark Heinz is. If you have been a subscriber of Cowboy State Daily's news for any length of time, you know Mark's work. Mark's beat is the outdoors, but there's a really good reason that Mark is our outdoors guy, because he has lived this lifestyle. So I'm going to say hello, Mark Heinz. Welcome to the Roundup. In a different capacity, because you were here a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
The tables were turned.
I interviewed you, so it's nice to be on this side of the table.
Yes, well, this is usually where it is. Once a day, folks, I get to talk to Mark about the stories that he has done.
Hmm.
Because again, if you watch our newscast, you'll see Mark at least once a day for one story a day on our newscast, because all of the stories that Mark does for Cowboy State Daily, or the vast majority, are outdoors, and Wyoming is an outdoors type of state. Mark, tell us a little bit about, because we're going to get into some of the things that you're covering right now, but
Hmm.
tell us a little bit about your interest in the outdoors, which started at a very young age.
Well, yeah, I was essentially raised by Jeremiah Johnson. My dad, he's no longer with us. He passed in 2012. But you talk about a guy who was born in the wrong century. Absolutely. He had a career with the Forest Service, but he retired early. He was at least 10 years younger than I am now when he retired, because he got up high enough in the ranks that he was getting stuck in desk jobs, and that just isn't what he wanted to do. So, I'm your typical weekend warrior when it comes to the outdoors. My dad was hardcore. In fact, when he retired from the Forest Service, he went up to BC, British Columbia, and worked for an outfitter friend of ours, uh, for the serious backcountry. He had some incredible stories, like leading a horse pack train, and it came around a corner and on a steep hillside, and they came around the corner and ran into a grizzly bear, and half the horses ended up rolling down the hill. That was just another day for my dad. So yeah, I credit him for, I mean, my folks had us out. I was the youngest of five kids, and I remember being 3 or 4 years old and on, backcountry trips. So that's where it came from. Came from my old man, from my dad.
But your childhood, listening to those stories, your parents actually picked you all up and moved you across the world
Hmm.
for a time, which
Yeah,
also
yeah,
fueled your interest in the outdoors.
yeah. A lot of people are probably familiar with the Peace Corps. Generally, when people take Peace Corps assignments is when they're young and single. My dad took a Peace Corps assignment when he was, in his early to mid 30s, and had five kids and a wife, and he picked all of us up, a whole family of seven, and took us over to Ghana, Africa, to work a Peace Corps assignment there. So, again, those are some of my very, very earliest memories. Being warned not to go down by the pond because of the crocodiles, seeing zebras in the wild, seeing baboons. We actually had a young baboon that we fostered for a while in our house. And he used to
That's the
run.
coolest.
Yeah. He used to jump up on the dinner table and steal our vitamins. Yeah, and not so much hearing, but feeling the lions roar. When lions do their roaring or their huffing that they do when they're out hunting, you can feel it in your chest. And again, I was, maybe 3.5, 4 years old, but I can still remember that. I can remember what that felt like to have a lion vocalization vibrating in your chest. And so yeah, I think I forgot to mention I was actually born in North Platte, Nebraska, but again, we picked up and moved to Africa for a while when I was still very young, and then came back to the States and settled in Colorado. Kind of picked up where we left off, and I was in, we were in various towns. Probably the most prominent place in Colorado was Leadville. If anybody's familiar with Leadville, I mean, it's funny. I live in Laramie, and everybody brags about it being 7,200 feet. Leadville's elevation is over 10,000. So, and it's
So
right at the base of Elbert and Massive, the two highest peaks in Colorado were right there, right out your window when you're in Leadville. So that was cool.
So your childhood really is growing up in the outdoors and
Hmm.
with this love of the outdoors in the Mountain West here
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
Colorado, North Platte. You found your way though, somehow you decided that telling stories was something that was important to you because you wanted to be a writer. This is what you went to school for. You went to be
Hmm.
you went into the English. You were going to be an English major. You were an English major. Tell us about how you then took this love of the outdoors and said, "No, I want to go a different direction. I want to be in a classroom."
Sure, sure. No, I initially thought after I got out of high school, I initially thought I wanted to be an English teacher. I mean, I'd always been into reading and writing. I read The Lord of the Rings solo. I think that I was 11 when I first read it. My dad again, Jeremiah Johnson, he was a bit of a Luddite. We did not, for the vast majority of my time growing up in our house, we did not have a television in the house. So I read a lot. I curled up with the encycl. This is back, when they had the physical encyclopedias. I spent a lot of time on the living room floor reading encyclopedias. So anyway, always kind of a language nerd and a writing nerd. So I thought, oh, I want to be an English teacher. So I started in school in, because I grew up and finished high school in Butte, Montana. Started school in Bozeman, Montana, at Montana State University, and just came to the realization that I liked my nieces and nephews. I liked the kids in my family, but kids in general, I just didn't see myself being in charge of a classroom full of 30 other people's kids. I don't have the temperament for it. I don't have the patience for it. So, this is a bad idea. So after a few years, I completed all my general studies and in my two minors. I got minors in political science and sociology. I completed all that at MSU. Then I transferred over to the University of Montana in Missoula to go through their journalism program. And boy, that was English, I kind of sailed through it. I would, I wouldn't even start my papers until the night before they were due. Always get A's and B's. Man, journalism, I started getting handed C minuses and D's. Those guys were tough. It was like I call it like Marine boot camp for writers. I got my butt handed to me. I got humbled. Because I walked into that school thinking I was all that as a writer, and they told me different. So yeah, and because I had all my other credits already done, it only took me about 2.5 years to get through the journalism uh, program in Missoula, and then I was off on my career. Oh, yeah.
So obviously that did not hamper you. You're
No.
getting in there and saying, "Oh, this is harder than I thought it would."
Oh
It
yeah.
didn't discourage you from continuing to say, "You know what? I want to tell stories. I want to write stories."
Hmm.
And for other people to educate other people. And you again, you mentioned being, in Butte when you were a teenager and things like that, the stories that you could tell from that.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
continued to be very involved and immersed in the outdoors. Again, you were in the Mountain West.
Hmm.
And so eventually, even though you have, poli sci and sociology and things like that, the outdoors continued to be part of who you were. And you continued to hunt. You
Hmm.
continued to
Yep.
your hobby. If you've watched any of was it 2 years ago that you did the 4th of July, the national anthem on a
I've
chainsaw?
done it. I've done it a couple times, and
Yeah,
I plan on doing it again this year.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the outdoors is where your heart is. when it comes to if you're not sitting in front of a computer writing something, you love to be outside. Tell us about what draws you to the outdoors, the wildlife, the nature.
Uh, Everything, I like being by myself. 99% of what I do on my own. I do solo. Um, so I mean, I just like the solitude. I like being out there. Like I said, it's limited between work and family. I don't, like I said, I get out when I can. Anybody who's got a job and a family can identify with that. Not nearly as much as I'd like to be out there, but whenever I get a chance, yeah. Even if it's just taking my dog for a silly little walk in the hills out here outside of Laramie, just whenever I can. And I mean, I don't know if I can really put it into words or boil it down to an elevator speech for you, Wendy. But it's just being out there among the wildlife and out in the landscape, the solitude, the quiet. I've just always liked it.
And so that makes you just very tuned into these outdoor stories that we
Mhm.
do. And it's fun, folks, when we do an 8:30 in the morning team call where all of the reporters get together and all of the behind the scenes staff get together and we all share story ideas and things like that. And it is so often that Mark will say, well, I did this once and I was here once. And, the big joke is, you passed through Park County a couple of times. And even though,
Yeah, yeah,
even
yeah.
though that was part of your career, and that's where you
Mhm.
and I met,
Yeah, yeah.
was in Cody.
Mhm.
And you worked for the Enterprise and I worked for
Mhm.
radio, kind of like Leo Wolfson and I. Yeah, it's funny
Yeah,
how that
yeah,
works.
exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. It's
yeah.
I've had that joke that I've worked at the same news outlets with a lot of people at Cowboy State Daily, just never at the same time. Like
Right.
Renee Jean and I both worked for the Sydney Herald Leader, but 25 years apart. Leo and I both worked for the Cody Enterprise, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
Greg and I both worked for the Laramie Boomerang, but not at the same time. So it's got kind of the running joke. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, as far as my career in reporting, this is the first gig I've had where I've been a dedicated outdoors reporter. I've written it all. I used to be Claire McFarland, saying that jokingly. I used to be a huge part of my career. In fact, the bulk of my career previously was probably crime and courts. So I have a lot of experience with that. And then anything you could. I mean, I've never been a full-time dedicated sports reporter, but I have written a few sports features here and there. But yeah, so I have a well-rounded, I guess, past with newspaper reporting and writing everything from breaking news stories to features. But this is Cowboy State Daily, which I started in August of 2022. This is the first time I've been dedicated to writing just about the outdoors. And of course, I do stories. I know I had the wonderful opportunity to do that. The really inspiring story about the young firefighter in Laramie who had the terrible accident at work and has since making great efforts to bounce back. So I still love doing stories like that too.
But this is your first opportunity to marry these two things about your life, your
Mhm.
love for the outdoors and your
Yeah,
skill set and your love
correct.
for writing to be
Yeah.
able to put
Hmm.
these together. So
Hmm.
tell us what are you writing about now? Because obviously this is the time of year when the earth is just coming alive and the animals are waking up and what's taking up a lot of your attention now this time of year, middle of May? What's happening right now that's catching your attention?
Bears, the Grizzlies, everybody. I like to say even people that hate Grizzlies still love Grizzlies. They're such an iconic species out here in Wyoming and then also in Montana. And there's even quite a few in Idaho as well. Um, they're majestic. They elicit respect, even a little bit of fear, but it's really, you have those few, it's almost always the big males that come out first. We usually have the first bear of the year is usually sometime in early March. But now, we're getting in mid-May, the floodgates have opened. So all the bears are out, including the moms with their new cubs. And that really excites people. We have this whole, uh, really a whole brigade of wildlife photographers who hang out around Yellowstone and Grand Teton, and that's what they do. They follow the bears around. I mean, Tom Magelson is, right there at the top. He's probably the most famous one. He's the one. He's really the one that put 399 and all her cubs on the map. But there's a whole host of people that do what he does and follow the grizzlies around as well, as well as the other critters are showing up with their young, the moose with their calves, elk, deer are having fawns, pronghorn are going to start having fawns here really pretty soon. So that's kind of what's going on.
You have learned, I'm sure, so much about these animals now that you're completely focused on them. And you knew a lot before. What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
things that you're finding out that, boy, I thought I knew this before? And gee, I'm talking to all these experts. I'm getting to know all these people, the wildlife photographers, the people who are your sources, the wildlife biologists. What are some of the things that you're learning as you get farther on into your career and really focused on outdoors
Oh
reporting?
gosh. Well, it wasn't that long ago that I really learned that coyotes are truly they're like little wolves. They really are a pack animal. I learned that about them, and just how creative the bears can get. Like Bruno, the big male grizzly, doing some busting through the ice to get fish. There's really anything that or there's virtually nothing they won't do to try to get food. They're very highly intelligent and really creative. They're not in these closed lanes that everybody thinks these animals are in. So that's always really fascinating to me. Learn new facts along those lines. What these animals will do and what they're capable of, and their problem solving skills. It's day-to-day survival for them. I mean, if they don't get creative, they starve. I mean,
That's right. Yes.
yeah.
I want to switch gears here real quickly because one of the things, just to another species, you had a huge part in making international news last year
Hmm.
when you broke a story for an incident that happened in Daniel, Wyoming,
Hmm.
about a man who had captured a wolf,
Hmm.
tortured it, and then killed it. And that set off almost an international incident. And when you, I want you to tell us the story of how you found out about it. And did you expect this story to be this big when you first reported it? So tell us about the story of Cody Roberts and the wolf and
No,
Daniel.
it started out being there was a report that somebody had a wolf in a bar in Daniel. It's kind of more, oh, that's weird, maybe like a ha ha story. And then found out we had a really good source in Sublette County, who will remain anonymous. Period. But kind of gave us the inside scoop on that and what had really happened. I had an inclination that it was going to set people off because nobody likes cruelty to animals. That is when people hurt small children or animals, that tends to set people off. I didn't expect it to go as international as it did. I mean, I knew the story was probably going to blow up around the region, but I mean, when I got into it, I was getting emails and messages from folks in Ireland, all over Europe, pretty much all over the world, because I get, previously, as you know yourself, in our previous jobs, they were pretty local. Like, the probably the biggest audience I had prior to this in a news organization was when I worked in Twin Falls, when I worked for the Times News, which is a regional newspaper covering all of southern Idaho. But Cowboy State Daily, being a fully digital platform, it goes out all over the world. And so that I guess, with my brain being conditioned from, the 20 plus years of how things were before working for a local newspaper, I guess I wasn't able to wrap my brain around how international it was. But when it did take off, I was a little, yeah, again, I was a little surprised about how big that story got all over the world.
It was a big deal. And again, that kind of put you in the crosshairs of comments and things like that, not necessarily at you, but you were kind of responsible for monitoring all of those things and following that story through. And that was a
Hmm.
story that you followed for absolutely
Yeah.
months and
Hmm.
still continues to reverberate now. Is there any other story that you can think of that has reverberated even close to that much in the time that you've been working at Cowboy State Daily?
Not really. I mean, it was a pretty big deal when Grizzly 399 got hit and killed. I mean, that really broke a lot of people's hearts. But to the level of what happened with the Wolf and Daniel, no, nothing blew up that big.
It was a big deal, and
Mhm.
3.99 was a big deal.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk just for a minute about your sources and the people that you talk to and that you have gotten to know as the outdoors reporter for Cowboy State Daily. You have this stable of wildlife biologists and wildlife
Mhm.
photographers. Do they feed you stories? Do they call you up and say, "Hey, I've got a story," or do you reach out to them when you know that there's something
It's
happening?
it's it's more of the latter, more me reaching out to folks when I have something. Once in a while I'll get tips, but usually it's me reaching out to them. And it's interesting. I mean, you know, my dad was a forester. He was in the Forest Service. So I kind of grew up around outdoor scientists. I mean, I knew a lot of biologists and people like that growing up. But the folks I've gotten to know since working for Cowboy State Daily were really the photographers. And they have to know quite a bit of science themselves. I mean, if you're, well, I mean, anybody can tell you who's a really hardcore hunter. In order to hunt animals effectively, you have to understand quite a bit of biology. The same thing with the wildlife photographers. They can't just be out there taking pictures of animals they think are cool. They have to know a lot about the animals and their biology and their habits. And so that's been interesting and fun getting to know all the photographers, all the people, because I mean, they're living the dream. They're out there on the front lines every day. I mean, some of these folks they'll take their RV into Yellowstone and or Grand Teton, and they'll live there for like most of the year. From the time there's enough snow melted off that they can get in there until the time the snow really starts flying and they got no choice, they have to leave. They are there. And I think, well, that's maybe I'm in the wrong line of work. That's cool what they get to do. But it's a lot of, I mean, they're working their butts off and they got a lot of competition, so
Yes.
yeah, I really I have to hand it to the wildlife photographers. That's there's so many awesome, all the outfitters I know, all the hunters, all the both the people who are currently working for the agencies and the folks that are retired from the agency. I've handed to all my great sources I have, but a special shout out to the photographers.
You talk about the outfitters and things like that. One of the other parts of your beat, it's not just covering wildlife, it's also following the news and the trends and the issues surrounding Second Amendment rights
Hmm.
and anything that's related to firearms. And so you've been watching kind of the news, you've been watching all the things
Hmm.
happen politically. Have you been getting any indication that there's any concerns of that community, whether it's the firearms community, whether it's firearms manufacturing, things like
Hmm.
that? What's happening in that area
Oh,
right
there's
now?
there there's always a lot happening. Of course, Wyoming, we just passed that law rescinding the gun-free zones, and of course, there's people with very strong opinions on both sides of that. And it's not my job to tilt things one way or the other, or have my personal opinions creep into things. It's just, to report what people are saying. So that takes effect July 1st. I think that's going to be a big deal. As far as people just scrambling to meet the new regulations and try to craft for their individual school or whatever it is, how to meet that law and also meet the concerns of the folks who aren't too wild about it. Nationally, there's always stuff going on. California, as you would expect, is continually trying to pass a lot of strict rules. We've seen a lot of strict rules being implemented to the south of us in Colorado, but they have a much larger population than we do. They got big, metropolitan centers, and I the concern around firearms in a big city they're going to be different than they are in a rural place like Wyoming. Firearms are going to exist in a completely different context there than they do here. So, regardless of whether you think Colorado's regulations are too strict, or if you don't think they're strict enough, whatever whatever opinion you have, I don't think you can deny that their circumstances are just different there. So they're going to approach it from a different angle. But that does affect us because we're neighboring states, and we have. There have been a few instances even of firearms related companies that have pulled up stakes and left Colorado and come to Wyoming because from their perspective, Wyoming is just a friendlier state for them. And for them, from their perspective, that's a smart business decision. So that's always interesting too to see what's developing on that front.
Absolutely. Talking about that in these neighboring states, we are Cowboy State Daily. So the idea
Mhm.
is, we focus on Wyoming, but Mark, so much of what you cover is yes, Wyoming, but you reach outside of Wyoming because
Mhm.
these things do affect us. You've talked about wolves in Colorado. You've talked about grizzly bears in Montana. You and I have talked quite a bit. And I think this is just fascinating. It seems like you really are very interested in the idea of these prairie grizzlies that are
Oh yeah.
moving into the this habitat which we don't consider grizzly country, but which historically is. Tell us about kind of this migration because I think that we can probably consider you an expert at this point because of the amount of research and the
Yeah,
number of
yeah,
people that you
just
talk to. I mean,
yeah,
you've gotten an unofficial degree in wildlife biology
uh,
because of what you do. But
yeah.
tell us about the grizzly bears and how they're really having and being forced out of their in our near history and our recent history, they've been in this little area, but now they're having to expand. Tell us about what you're learning about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that captured my imagination, and I've been kind of geeking out on it ever since because again, growing up in Montana, it's funny because our reporter, David Madison, who's in Montana, I joke with him. I said, "You are probably so sick every time you bring up a place or a location in Montana." I go, "Oh, yeah, David, I used to go there all the time when I was a kid." One of them is Freeze Out Lake up by Great Falls, and then another one is Red Rocks, which is kind of more on the Montana-Idaho state line. I mean, these are places where my dad and I would go when I was, young back in the 80s, and it would never cross your mind that there'd be a grizzly bear there. You might have had a vague idea that they were there in the past, in the distant past. There'd been grizzlies there, but never in your wildest dream would you. But now there's grizzlies, and there's grizzlies at Red Rocks. There's grizzlies in Freeze Out. There's grizzlies out by Shoto, Montana. And you're right. They're it's not anything weird from their point of view. They're reclaiming their natural habitat. A lot of people, elk is another species. A lot of people don't realize that elk and grizzlies really are prairie species. They were driven off the prairies in the Great Plains by the expansion of the white man westward. That's the whole reason they got pushed back up into the mountains. But naturally, they're prairie species. In fact, I think I've heard it argued that's the reason why grizzlies can tend to be far more aggressive and territorial than black bears because the black bear evolved in thickly forested areas where running and hiding in the trees or climbing a tree was always an option, whereas grizzlies evolved out on the plains. Actually, their ancestors go back to the steppes of Russia, where if you're a mama bear with a cub, there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. Your only choice is to stand your ground. So I've heard that argued, and I think that's a good argument. That's why grizzlies have more of an attitude because they still have that Great Plains DNA where uh, out there ain't nowhere to run. You stand and fight or you lose. That's all there is to it. So
Kind of like
I
polar
mean,
bears up there on the
yeah,
ice.
yeah. So it just, I mean, to me, it's fascinating, and yeah, especially in Montana, and it's really interesting how that's affected the people there, how they've had to adjust, and there's some people are rightfully so. It's like, I'm a farmer out in on the plains of Montana, and for the past several generations, we haven't even had to think about grizzlies. And all of a sudden, there's a grizzly gorging itself in my grain silo, and my calves are 100 yards away. Uh, of course, these ranchers are going to rightfully be, hey, what's going on here? I didn't have a say in this, so it's interesting. And also the elk. I mean, there's elk showing up. Nebraska is having to get used to elk. And again, the farmers there, I didn't have to worry about elk gobbling my hay, and now all of a sudden I do. So it's just interesting the dynamics of these species starting to reclaim the Great Plains and prairie habitat where they were absent long enough that people quit thinking of them as plain species, but they always have been.
Yes, so interesting. I just got an education. That was great,
Yeah,
Mark.
yeah.
This has got to be a really interesting time in our modern era to be an outdoors journalist because
Hmm.
there is so many things happening. We're talking again still about the declassifying of the grizzly bear, taking
Hmm.
the grizzly bear off the endangered species list, and it's up for debate again. And that's something that you're going to be covering and following then this year again, I'm
Yeah.
guessing.
Yeah, that's a never-ending story. If you remember that movie from when we were
Oh
kids,
yeah.
the never-ending
Never
story.
ending story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, there's a lot of arguments on both sides of that. Some folks they say, the numbers have far exceeded what they were supposed to be. to, both the numbers and territory. And then other people are saying they're still not there yet. They don't have the contiguous habitat that they need and the genetic exchange between subpopulations that they truly need. And so we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Some folks are saying with the current administration in Washington, the folks who do want delisting are quite optimistic that it is going to go through this time. But and that would include some hunting of grizzlies, at least in Wyoming, which would be a big deal because there hasn't been hunting of grizzly bears in the lower 48 forever. And so that would be a big deal. I mean, there'd be a lot of people contending for those tags if we opened a grizzly season in Wyoming. So again, that's definitely something to keep our eyeballs on.
This has been so interesting, Mark. Oh my goodness, this is a great conversation. I want to just to kind of steer us towards kind of the end of this conversation, talk a little bit about you and your family. You're getting ready for a big move. You've been in Laramie for how long now?
Just shy of 12 years.
Wow. And you're
Hmm.
getting ready to move and you're moving more central. It seems to be a
Hmm.
trend with Cowboy State Daily. We've got a few
Yeah,
people that are moving
everybody's
to
moving to,
central Wyoming. What is that?
yeah, everybody's moving to Fremont County. Yeah, no, this my wife Kindy and I, we met in Powell. When you and I first met, I wasn't with Kindy, but I met her after I relocated to Powell to work for Eastman. I worked for Eastman's Outdoors for a while with their publications. But we have a Brady bunch. We've got 5 kids, huge age range, huge age range. When we first got married, the age range was 19 was the oldest, and the youngest was 4. 5 kids
Wow.
in one house with one bathroom.
Oh
So yeah,
my.
that was fun.
That's an
Try
adventure in
but
itself
but
right
yeah,
there.
they're currently up to ages 30. The oldest is 33, and the youngest is 18 and graduating from high school. And so with her graduating from high school, and we've got so much, our oldest girl is in Riverton. My wife's parents are in Riverton. One of our granddaughters is there. So we have a lot of family there anyway. And we figured, okay, we got the youngest kid out of the house and graduated from high school. Now's the time to do it, so let's do it. Let's relocate to Riverton. So that's in a nutshell. That is why we're moving to Riverton. And of course, my job with Cowboy State Daily is remote, so it goes where I go. So,
Isn't that
and my
great? Yeah,
my
we
wife
like
already
that.
had, yeah. And Kendy's got a job at the bank there, so we're set. It's just again, it's from a family standpoint, it makes perfect sense. For my job, it probably makes a little bit more sense for me to be centrally located instead of stuck all the way out here on one of the edges of Wyoming. Because when something happens on the other side of Wyoming, yeah, it's a
You
six,
can't
7 hour
go.
drive. Yeah, a lot of times there's stories I'd like to be boots on the ground, but I just can't because the time just isn't there because Laramie's a long way from anywhere else, especially up in your part of the state.
Yes, absolutely. So you'll
So,
be closer up here to
yep,
closer to Yellowstone, closer to where all this stuff is happening. You'll be able to do more
exactly.
remote things. We're hoping to see you do some more videography with
Hmm.
Riley Strand and Hannah Brock,
Hmm.
our in-house videographers. And you've got
Hmm.
some plans to do some things with that. Tell us a little bit about what some of the things you're planning with Riley and Hannah.
Oh well, I still want to do. It didn't come together this year again, just because the time just wasn't there for any of us. But I really want to do a video story about St. Patrick's Day in Butte. It's insane. A lot of people don't
Oh man.
realize Butte is, well, I would say being from there, it is the most, it's even more Irish than Boston. It is incredibly Irish. So St. Patrick's Day there is just nuts. It's awesome. So if anybody who hasn't been to Butte on St. Patrick's Day, you need to go. It is off the chain. It is so much fun. So that's really the big one. But of course, we're gonna have to wait on that one just because we
Well,
wanted to
yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
We wanted to do it this year, but our schedules just would not allow it. So that's kind of and then i- i- anything else. I mean, I'm sure we'll come up with some
Yeah. Well,
some
you guys
more
did the
ideas.
great, you did the great story about you and Riley went to the Laramie Civic Center
Oh,
and did
that
the
was fun.
haunted. That was a great
Yeah,
one.
yeah. That didn't have anything to do with the outdoors, but that's one of the
Yeah.
funnest stories I ever did.
And
When we went ghost hunting in the Civic Center. That
that's
was that was
right.
a that was a hoot. I love that. That was a lot of fun.
And you also did this video story with Riley about the schoolhouse
Hmm. Hmm.
in
The
Albany
school.
County.
Hmm. Yep, yep.
So this is something that hopefully we'll see you do more of. And
Yeah.
again,
Oh,
because you're
yeah.
going to be centrally
Absolutely.
located, and now Riley and Hannah are going to be nearby, so you guys
Mhm.
will hopefully be able to collaborate on some of those things. Mark, what do you look forward to in this next year of your career here, the next year in Cowboy State Daily? What are some of the stories? What are some of the things that you're looking forward to and that you really love when the season rolls around?
Um, well, right now I'm kind of in that moving head space. So I'm looking forward to
True.
that being over. And personally, I haven't done a lot of fishing since I've been in Albany County for whatever reason. I'm looking forward to really getting back into that. Um, I'm eager to see what happens with the Grizzly Bears, whether they get delisted, and if they do, all the interesting, things that are going to come out of that. The wildlife crossing projects. There's a big one up by Du Bois, which is going to be right in my neck of the woods, and that's fascinating because that's so important to wildlife conservation, and that's one thing that everybody seems to be able to get behind. I mean, I do deal with a lot of controversial subjects where there's strong opinions on both sides, and sometimes people, giving each other the stink eye across the aisle because the topics can be so divisive. But wildlife crossing seems to be one that everybody loves. Everybody, seems to be able to get behind those because it is important. I mean, it's a wildlife conservation thing and it's a human safety thing too. I mean, there's a lot of, horrible damage to cars as well as people getting injured and sometimes even being involved in fatal accidents because they're hitting these big animals. So, I'm really looking forward to that, and um,
Continuing the
just can
continuing the
continue
saga.
continue to see what keeps popping up over the summer. There's always something interesting going on. A lot of time I don't try to predict or guess what it's going to be because I'm always wrong. There's
We're
always
we're
something that pops up that I wasn't expecting.
we're kind of hoping for a quiet bison versus tourist year
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Yellowstone.
yeah.
Always.
Let's hope so.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mark, this has been just a fascinating conversation. And I know you've got a lot going on in your life. And so we're so glad you took just a few minutes and gave us an update and told us a little bit about where you're coming from. Because I think these conversations with our Cowboy State Daily reporters are so important because, especially now that we're doing video news, we have your faces out there. You all are telling us, and to me, it's so great to know a little bit behind the scenes. Well, what brought this person to where they're now my trusted source for outdoors information?
Mhm.
And this is why, folks, this is why Mark Heinz is our trusted source for outdoors reporting because Mark has lived it. Mark loves it. This is in his heart, and we are so glad that he is here with us at Cowboy State Daily, bringing us all of these wildlife and Second Amendment and all of these really interesting issues and topics that are important to all of us here in the Cowboy State. Mark Hines, thank you for your time today, and good luck
Oh,
with packing because I know that's
thanks.
you're knee deep in
Thanks. Oh
right
yeah.
now.
Yep. Fun stuff.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, folks, for tuning in today. And tune in next week. We're going to have another really great guest. And if you've missed any of these previous guests, because my gosh, we're a good year and a half into the Roundup. So we've got a whole bunch of previous podcasts that if you've missed any, you want to go back and check out because Wyoming is full of really interesting people. So thanks for tuning in to this interesting conversation. Tune in next week. Have a great week.